You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hello, all you progressive hedonists. I'm so happy you're listening in. Today, I got an email from a friend about granola. That really wasn't about granola at all, but about community and the importance of connecting with each other during hard times. Julia Sherman, known on Substack and Instagram as Salad for President, set up a genius gift chain in this email. Anyone who signs up makes granola for someone they don't know, sends it along, and can also send along a second batch for people affected by the California fires. Now, I'm not much of a cook, as you might know. I have burned my fair share of granola, but I'm willing to go all in here for Julia and the granola chain. I really wanted to write back to Julia and say, hey, can I just buy my granola? But that didn't seem really in the spirit of things. Julia believes in the healing power of a thoughtful care package. And you know what? So do I. Take a sec to think about what you might do to strengthen relationships in your community and maybe with people you don't even know in your community. And I'll tell you a little bit about my guest today. My guest is LinYee Yuan. She's the founder of Mold, which is a platform that explores the intersection of design and food. I wanted to hear all about the innovations going on that could create a better future for all of us, using, ag waste and making them into biomaterials or answering really hard questions. What I learned from LinYee was we're really not trying to get to the solution. We're trying to understand the trouble. We need to go there first. LinYee's obsession is fostering local food sovereignty through collective activism. And this led her to create another project in addition to Mold called Field Meridians. With Field Meridians, she's excited to plant a food forest in Crown Heights. I can't attest to whether she's going to be up for making granola as part of a chain letter, but I do know that she would be the first to champion communities that flourish. So let's give this conversation I had with LinYee a listen. LinYee, welcome to Progressive Hedonist.
Thanks so much for having me, Dana. I'm so honored to be here and really excited to have this opportunity to chat with you.
You had written something, I think at the beginning of Mold, that resonated for me at this moment in my journey, which is you're asking how we can harness joy and play in order to find a regenerative food system that is good for all. And that is really the idea behind Progressive Hedonist. And I'm curious where your interest in food began to get to this amazing point today.
I am a first-generation Chinese American. My parents both immigrated to the United States from Taiwan. And I think I've always located my identity around food and eating. So growing up in Houston, Texas, I was lucky enough to grow up with both sets of my grandparents close by. And I had aunts and cousins also all within driving distance. And every family gathering was anchored in some sort of eating extravaganza, whether it be like weekend dim sum in Chinatown or Chinese New Year or Easter or Christmas. It would always really be centered around food and our food traditions, and also the kind of intersection of different kinds of foods. I grew up in Texas, and so there was tamales at the table. I eat fajitas every time I go home. Eating is such a privilege and also a source of joy for me and my family. And so my mother is also a dietitian, and so having a relationship with our food has always been part of our understanding of what food is. And my father is an avid gardener. I think his singular passion or hobby in life is fishing. And so there's always been this very immediate connection to understand where our food comes from, how it got there, and also knowing that it was a possibility to have this type of relationship with our food.
You obviously care an enormous amount about design. And with Mold, you've chosen designers as the vector to approach the food system. How did that begin?
My day job was to be a design editor for an incredible online resource called Core 77. It still exists. It's one of the oldest design websites on the internet. And I had the unbelievable luck to edit this wonderful website of really curious working industrial designers. And at the time, there was a lot of hand wringing because the iPhone had just come out. And for industrial designers whose work is really about making decisions around the objects that we live with every day, this dematerialization of so many different things through the lens of the iPhone was creating a lot of anxiety for people. And so it was a really interesting time to be editing designers and writers who were thinking through what it means to be a designer in the world today. Add layers to that, which is the materials and the extractive nature of materiality and questions around sustainability and circular design. It just made for a really interesting place to think and ask questions. And I really fell in love with that process of crafting questions, working with experts across various fields, and offering solutions at very different scales for some of the thorniest problems and questions of our time. I was noticing a number of really interesting student projects that were coming out of the university system that were asking questions around food and food systems, food storage. And at the time, there weren't really writers writing about those projects. And I thought, well, here I am as a lover and admirer of design and the design process, and as a lover of food and making food and food as a kind of narrative to bring people together. I was like, well, here's another great nights and weekends project for me to to work on.
Oh
And so
boy.
Mold became a platform in my mind for us to just document all these really interesting, provocative ideas that were coming out of primarily student projects at the time.
What was the most provocative idea that you found at the time?
Oh, this was not a student project, but this was a project from Philips, the kind of multinational appliance brand, I would say. And Philips had a design research studio at the time. And they came up with this project called the microbial home. The concept was basically a kitchen of the future that was fully circular. And the central product was this kitchen island that looked almost like it was like a giant sink almost. And it was like a copper still. And the idea would be like you would prep all of your organic foods on this wooden platform. All the food waste and kind of cuts would go into this sink slash still. And then as these organic wastes would ferment, the gases from the fermentation would then power the lighting in the kitchen as well as the gas stove. I love that it was this idea of designing with microbes and harnessing this natural process to actually use for the energy to power our kitchens. And it was really poetic. It was beautifully designed. And that project really sparked something inside of me, like sparked my imagination about what could be possible.
I wish that something like that had come to pass. We're so far from that. And I remember when I was at Food and Wine, we covered kitchens a lot and would see the innovations, which were generally like a refrigerator talking to you. I mean, I've been wrong so many times about what I think would hit, but I'm like, no one needs the refrigerator to talk to them and tell them they're out of milk. Like you open the door and you can see you're out of milk. But this, what you're describing from Philips, sounds really incredibly special. And the idea of using those gases instead of putting them in landfill and releasing methane to actually heat your house is kind of amazing.
It is, and it's something that, continues to capture my imagination today, which is the idea that our waste products and byproducts could then be the materials and the energy to power our futures. And I think that kind of thread is something that is deeply needed, and, like, we really need to embed that kind of thinking, across disciplines, as people who are city dwellers, as people who care about the world around us. Nothing should go to waste, and I think that's something that all of our ancestors have taught us in different forms, whether it's through canning or just fermentation, period.
I loved your wasted issue. I'm passionate about not wasting and every day make efforts and every day both succeed and fail. In that issue, you talked, or some of the writers talked about the materials that have come from waste, which I thought were fascinating. And I'm wondering if that's something that you've tracked and have an interest in.
Yes. Before I go there, I just wanna note and honor your generosity around your approach to waste. I think we all should recognize that we can all try every day and also fail every day, and yet still that makes a difference. And so thank you for making space for us to all try and fail, because I think that so much of that trying and failing is really about recognizing our relationship with waste. And that in and of itself, I think is very, very valuable.
Thank you for that. And my onion skins that are in my compost right now also say thank you.
Yeah, I'm also like, "Oh, if it doesn't go into the stock, it's going into the compost." So, someone will use it at some point, whether it's that someone is the microbes in the soil or the earthworms. Someone's gonna enjoy those peels. I think that thinking not just about food waste and the many, many ways that we, especially as Americans, are so far removed from where our food comes from and the value and labor and energy that goes into producing food. It's so opaque to us. I don't wanna be, like, judgmental, because the reality is that we don't have that information. It's not being shared or provided to us in any kind of tangible way. I'm also really interested in the ways that architects and designers are thinking about agricultural waste, which is closer to the source, because the way that so much of our food production is set up, we only use a tiny, tiny bit of the entire plant, which uses a lot of energy and resources to actually grow. There are so many people doing incredible work, including one of my favorite people and collaborators, Mei-Ling Loco, who is thinking about uses for agricultural waste at the source, potentially in building materials, in architectural materials. There are incredible people working with mycelium who are also using agricultural waste to create other types of structures, whether that's packaging inside of boxes or walls, bricks. The possibilities are really exciting. I think that when we talk about design, specifically industrial design and even architectural design, questions of scale become a central tension, whether or not, quote unquote, a product is successful. But what I am excited about as far as new ways of thinking and new ways of designing are emerging is that we're seeing designers, material specialists, architectural designers starting to work with vernacular materials that are specific to a place. And I think that that is really the path forward across disciplines.
I have a sense of what you mean by vernacular and of a place, but could you give me a specific of what that means?
Sure. So, thinking about, for example, here in New York State used to grow a lot of hemp, and it's something that this land is capable of doing and does so very happily. And so, thinking about things like hempcrete as a potential source of material as opposed to concrete, I think is one small example. I would say in the last 50 years of design, we are using materials that last forever, plastic being the primary culprit. And when we think about our needs, there's really very few things that we actually need access to forever.
I have never thought of that. That's one of those emojis where the head blows off. It's true. Like, plastic in theory is so great, I mean, for so many reasons, but in theory, because it doesn't degrade, and yet that is why it is so dangerous.
That's right. The only things that I think we should value that should last forever are ecologies, like living ecologies that evolve. And so thinking about how those things nurture all of the entities that are involved in it, they're also not fixed, right? So it's not like you go to an old growth forest and it looks the same as it did 100 years ago. It has changed so much, even though people haven't made these interventions there. And so I think that when thinking about a materiality, that's something that I really encourage my students to consider is like, what is the actual lifespan of this intended product, right? How long does it actually need to be in use? What happens afterwards? And really nothing, including our buildings, lasts that long.
We have a farm upstate where there's a chimney, and we discovered that we were about to set the house on fire, essentially, and had to take the chimney down. The bricks were from, like, the late 1700s, and so they were made of pure clay, and we just put them back to the land, right? Like, the chimney went from the top of the house to by the side of the house. It made me a little nervous because I'm like, "Well, what did they put in the clay in the 1700s?" Like, I don't know. And my husband's response was, like, they didn't have a lot of other things that they were going to, put into it that could harm the landscape because it was of the landscape. And I was like, "Okay, I trust you. We can put we can put the bricks under the grass."
So beautiful to consider the things that we use. If we could build a world together with that motto of like using things and also that are of the land, I think that we would probably all be in a much better place and also have a deeper relationship because we would know what is of the land. I mean, I don't think we really know what is of the land. I could say personally that has been part of my awakening is to be like, oh, what is of the land on my street?
I love reading about field meridians, which is bringing a sense of ecology and urbanity together. So could you talk about that a little bit?
So the theme of our conversation, I think, so far has been like, I like a side project. And so
Yes, that is yes, that's the sub-theme here for sure.
we have been publishing a print magazine that for Mold for the past 7 years. And when we started this project, we always intended it for it to be a 6-issue magazine. And the idea that a magazine had to last in perpetuity to be considered successful, I just didn't think it made sense. Like, why would something have to be forever for it to be successful? And so when we launched the print magazine, my offering was like, we're going to make 6 issues and we'll see what happens. In 2020, the pandemic happened. I was a new mother. There's just social uprisings around George Floyd's murder. And I felt a deep sense of loneliness and a deep sense of just uncertainty, like what is happening in this world. And simultaneously, we were trying to like make the 5th issue of the magazine. Clearly that wasn't going to happen on the timeline that I wanted it to happen on. And I started joining my neighbors to organize against proposed condo development that was happening on our block. And that experience really galvanized something inside of me, which made me realize that what brought me joy and pleasure was this work of organizing with my neighbors, of being together, of knowing one another. And I was like, this is the work I want to do for the next 10 years. And so Field Meridians grew out of that seed. So I thought, well, my offering to the world is like being this editor and being at the kind of crossroads of so many different interesting global projects and ideas around food. And I started to dream a little bit and I thought, how amazing would it be if Crown Heights, which is where I lived, which is my neighborhood, could be a beacon for food sovereignty for the world. Why wouldn't that be possible? And so that kind of idea has started to unfold through Field Meridians, which is an artist collective. We are using creative practice to invite our neighbors to notice the nature that surrounds us, to ask our neighbors, what should the future of food look like in Crown Heights specifically, and to dream together. And so our larger vision is to plant a food forest here in Crown Heights. I don't know how that will happen.
What has been the answer to some of those questions? So what does it look like for what's called food sovereignty in Crown Heights? Like, what is that? Have you discovered an answer to that question?
I think a lot of people have lots of thoughts, which is exactly why we're asking the question. Some of my neighbors want Crown Heights to have green roofs where we can grow food on our roofs or on our stoops and have access to it. Some of our neighbors just want more access to fresh, nutritious foods. I think that for me, my excitement bubbles around this idea of an edible city. How could New York, or specifically Crown Heights, offer a certain lens into what it means to be able to eat with the seasons in the place that you live? And that place could be New York City. It could be Central Brooklyn. I do want to recognize that many of my neighbors are food insecure, that there is so much need within our neighborhood, and that mutual aid as a practice that has, I would say, reemerged in the context of the pandemic has become a really central way of practicing how to support one another as a community and also address immediate needs of our neighbors. So there's an amazing organization called the Crown Heights Mutual Aid Organization that has been doing this work since the pandemic and continues to do the work. I am also a member of the Park Slope Food Co-op. The reason why I bring up the food co-op is because the membership model, the cooperative model, is so radical today. Like, even though it was founded 50 years ago, these ideas are still deeply needed. And when we talk about things like food sovereignty, when we talk about feeding our community, when we talk about food access, I do think cooperative membership models are an incredible model to consider for thinking about what it means to have access to food.
This episode is brought to you by Visit Ithaca, where great minds meet the great outdoors. Check them out at visitithaca.com. Ithaca is known for outstanding dining and local cider, wine, and beer. And here's a quick word from one of these great local businesses.
My name is Steve Seelan from South Hill Cider. So I started making cider about 20 years ago, and I made cider exclusively from wild apples for the first 10 years. And then around 2014, I decided to plant some actual cider apples in an orchard to start cider production just like a small winery. We have a tasting room. You can see the orchard, you can see the valley, and we pour tastings of our ciders. We have about 20 different ciders that we make. So there are beautiful hiking trails and gorges and waterfalls all over this area. And in fact, we're located right on the Finger Lakes Trail, where in 15 minutes you can walk down to a 140-foot waterfall that's on a land trust property.
If you're looking for a weekend away, you can't do much better than Ithaca. Check out visitithaca.com for more information and get to where great minds meet the great outdoors.
One of the questions I believe that you started Mold with was about the future of food and how do we feed 9 billion people, right? And so do you feel through the explorations of the issues that you've done and the work that you've done that you're closer to an answer for that and the designer's role in creating that answer?
This is a great question. And going back to our talking refrigerators, when I started Mold, the talking refrigerator was like the height of technology. It was going to be the answer to food waste. Like you, it just didn't really sit right with me. I was like, do we really need a refrigerator to tell us when we could just look inside? And I think in that moment, there were so many technological silver bullets that were being explored, whether it's lab-grown meat, hydroponic greenhouses, or whatever it might be. And I kind of went down the rabbit hole with all of these different visions of the future. It felt so far away and exciting. And what I realized about these specific visions of the future is that they belonged in the hands of the corporations and not in the hands of the people. And that also did not sit right with me. I realized that we will need all hands on deck to offer all 9 billion people on this planet a reliable access to food. And what I realized is that the world that I wanted to live in, the one that I wanted to inhabit and be part of, was one where small communities of people were actually in relationship with their food. And I'm not saying that it means that we have to all grow our own food. Scientists have done the math and it's just not possible. But I do think that by having access to methods of growing, of knowing that that's a possibility, of understanding like, oh, this is where chestnuts come from. It can be transformative. And also to know what's in season, to know that there is a chestnut season, to know that there is an apple season.
I've also heard you say that the shopper needs to be a partner in designing the food system. But what is the role of the shopper? Like, how does the shopper interact with the food system? I'm particularly interested because one of the goals of Progressive Hedonist, indeed, is to shape the shopper to understand that it's possible to shop for pleasure and purpose.
I am always interested in thinking about moving people away from just thinking of themselves as consumers or shoppers and to think about ourselves as creative collaborators. So you may not want to grow your food. You may not have access to greenery or space or land to be able to do that, but you can ask some questions around it. You can say, where was this apple grown? Was it done in conditions that were healthy for both the laborers who picked the apple and the land in which it was grown? Does the conditions in which my food is produced align with the conditions that I would want to thrive in? And I think that, unfortunately, it's almost impossible to do that consistently across our entire shopping list. I think that conventional food systems are designed in a way to obscure a lot of that information. So it's not our fault as shoppers that we don't know this. It's literally almost an impossible task to be able to untangle all of these threads. But I think if we start pulling one or two, it might lead us to some really interesting conversations. And it's actually what brought us to, at least my family, into a family decision to participate in a food cooperative for our grocery store, because I knew I couldn't make all those decisions or like know all that information. But now I'm shopping in a structure where the people who are making those decisions are asking those questions on my behalf. And that is a sense of safety that 99.9% of us do not have. And I recognize that, but I feel like, hey, let's start where we are and let's see what happens.
This connects to me to your notion about dichotomies and complexity, right? So the world is actually incredibly complex. And the decisions that we make every day around food, climate, I mean, what we wear, it's all interrelated and complicated. And yet so much of what we look at seems binary. When I started Progressive Hedonist, I was like, I'm going to make these recommendations because it's going to be so clear that I should, let's say, get rid of my gas stove and replace it. Maybe, but there are so many complexities. And actually, I find complexity somewhat paralyzing. I'm curious, when you think about this world that we live in that is filled with complexity, and yet we live in such a black and white state, what is the bridge between those for the best outcome for people and planet?
Oof, Dana, please tell me when you get an answer to this question. In the world of design, we talk a lot about unintended consequences. It's the paper or plastic question. It's the reusable versus disposable bag question. There's so many unintended consequences when we think about things at scale, in different contexts. There's not a black and white answer 99% of the time. There is only what we know in that moment. I think the first is we should all be humble. We should not pass judgment on anyone who's just trying to do their best. The second is something that I learned from one of my students recently. For their final, they were supposed to create a personal manifesto for themselves as designers. And one of my students said, "Don't design for solutions, design with the trouble." And I loved this idea because she was saying that there's so much complexity, there's so many troubles in this world. Sometimes the role of design is to design something that just points a finger at the trouble, to highlight that this is a trouble. And I was so moved by this approach that often when we're trying to navigate the complexity of decisions, it's not about offering a final solution. It's about just knowing that we're in relationship with this problem and doing the best we can with what we know in the moment.
What is the most controversial opinion that you hold?
Depends on who you're asking. I would say I'm an abolitionist. And I think for some people that is controversial. For others, it's just common sense. And from this rooted perspective of abolition comes all of the different ways that I want to show up in the world, which is, again, going back to considering using my energy to create like living infrastructures. That also means infrastructures of care for my community, for the people that I live in proximity to, whether I know them or not. And I don't believe that things like policing are supportive to those infrastructures of care.
And what is the book that you've read that you think everybody needs to read because it's inspiring and uplifting? I mean, I think there's a lot that we can read that is informative, but I'm looking on the uplifting side.
Well, I'm a nerd. Uplifting for me might feel different for other people, but I'm currently reading / listening to audiobook Zoe Schlanger's The Light Eaters. It's about this potential of plant intelligence and the ways that science is starting to unfold to better understand a certain kind of intelligence in plants.
You talk about a positive obsession. What is your positive obsession?
My positive obsession is to work with my community to plant a food forest in Crown Heights. We are actually kicking off our first planning meeting this Sunday, and I have anxiety about it because my fear is that people are going to come to the meeting thinking that we'll have answers for them. Like, oh, we have land and this is what we're going to do and this is how it's going to happen. When in reality, we're just holding space for people who are interested in this idea to come together and decide the path forward collectively, which is a much messier, more fluid, more unknown way of doing things. But my hope is that through this process, we will really be galvanized and build a sense of community and trust, because so much of the work that we're doing right now, it's really about practicing new ways of being together.
I think through the process you're describing, wonderful people emerge, and those committed to the vision of co-creating will help to co-create something extraordinary. And then you can build on that, because at some point, all the people who are a little less certain, they'll come along when you've come along. And so you'll have the right group to start, and then it will grow. It'll be its own little mycelium.
Great. I'm going to keep this little seed of hope that you've just planted in my pocket. So I'll bring that with me.
I feel that for sure. And you've already invested so much and so much heart. It's such a great place to start. You start from a fertile ground. You don't start from like dust and rocks. I always ask my guests, what meal would you create to nourish yourself and nourish the planet?
My immediate thought when you ask me this question is a giant pot of congee. I think it represents all of the things that I value in life, and it's also one of my most nourishing kind of soul foods that I would eat at any point, but always when I'm not feeling great. But I basically do 1 part rice to 8 cups stock or water, and you just kind of let it simmer until the starch of the rice kind of releases, and it creates a kind of porridge consistency. That's my favorite consistency. The other piece of it is a little bit of a cheat because it's not just kanji. Kanji is like a vehicle for all the different toppings. And so my meal for the world would then invite everyone to bring toppings for their kanji. Because I love a potluck. It's a little bit of laziness, a little bit of curiosity. I love just seeing what people are going to bring. It's my favorite format for any meal. So yeah, I would ask everyone to bring a topping for the kanji that we could all share.
That is so beautiful. And the very last question, when you wake up in the morning, what is the word that gets you moving through the day?
I first started thinking about this as a mantra when I was pregnant with my first child. And I was terrified because it's such a mundane thing to like be pregnant and give birth to a human, but also like so wildly crazy and magical. Like you're like, I've committed to take care of this thing for its entire lifetime, and I have no idea who it's going to be or like what their temperament's going to be. And I was just, it's an alien, it's a parasite in your body. And so I was like, let me just surrender to this process. I'm so type A in so many ways that I needed to be able to do that. And I think that it's really served me also as I've moved into different shapes of being a parent, being, the steward of these ideas, being a neighbor, being my 44-year-old self, like all of these new shapes that I'm kind of trying out and being in, it doesn't serve me to be rigid anymore. It really serves me best to just kind of be like Bruce Lee, like be like water,
Well, that concludes the podcast. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I'm very inspired by your unique perspective, and I'm so glad that we get to share it with everybody here on Progressive Hedonist. Can you tell people how to find you?
Yes. Find us at thisismold.com and at fieldmeridians.org.
And if they want to support your work to create a food forest in Crown Heights, is there a way to do that?
Yes, you can donate to our page at fieldmeridians.org or just drop us a line on Instagram and tell us that you're supporting us, and that energy is going to carry us through the next couple steps. So thank you.
Hey, if you enjoyed that conversation, which of course I hope you did, check me out on Instagram where we have some extra content, and subscribe wherever you can subscribe for podcasts, and leave those little stars. It's something that I never like to talk about, but other people do. And I want people to be able to hear this podcast and spread the word, which is how we're going to make a better future together. And it really helps us out. So thanks for listening. Thanks for being a great listener because you got this far, and have a great day.